Hello, my name is Sue Lufshine, and I am the Archival and Metadata Librarian at the University of Southern California Libraries. Welcome to the third video in the Society of American Archivists instructional video series on describing archives, a content standard. In this video, we will be going over the definition of a content standard and the relationship between content and encoding. This video is free and available to anyone who wants to learn more about DACS, but if you sign up to take the DACS workshop for credit, you will be responsible for understanding this content, and there will be a quiz to test your understanding. At the end of this video, you will understand the definition of a content standard, the purpose of a content standard, and what such a standard can contribute to an archival descriptive program. You will be able to articulate some of the problems that content standards, specifically DACS, can address and resolve. And you will understand the relationship and differences between content standards and encoding standards. Describing archives, a content standard is, as the name implies, a content standard, or more specifically, DACS is a data content standard. The Glossary of Archival and Records Terminology defines a data content standard as a set of formal rules that specify the content, order, and syntax of information to promote consistency and clarity. Data content standards provide guidelines on what kind of data to include. For example, DACS requires the inclusion of a title and also provides guidance for how that title should be derived and expressed. Archivists generally construct or devise a title for the collections we describe, and DACS tells us to formulate this title using two pieces of information, the name of the creator and the nature of the materials being described. DACS tells us to put the name first, followed by the nature of materials, in other words, the syntax and the content of information for a title element. For example, Abraham Lincoln Papers versus Papers of Abraham Lincoln. Both titles tell us that this collection holds the papers of Mr. Lincoln, but the former is constructed according to the syntax prescribed by DACS for the title element. Though DACS does not specify the order of elements, it does have a specific set of required elements that must be present for a descriptive tool to qualify as DACS compliant. DACS doesn't tell us in what order to put the title, the date, the extent, etc., but some structure standards like MARC do specify this kind of order. Now that we know what a data content standard is, we can get into why it's important to use one. Content standards like DACS provide institutions with a way to consistently achieve intellectual control. DACS is not only useful for finding aids, but for all types of descriptive objects. Depending on the context, all description of archival material should strive for some level of DACS compliance in order to ensure that descriptive information is applied completely and consistently. For example, including a title that has been formed according to the guidelines outlined in DACS establishes a standard terminology for that title that can be used in a variety of output settings and that can then be easily linked or referred back to. Content standards are often used in association with other types of standards, such as structure standards. For example, archivists will generally use DACS with EAD, which is a structure standard. DACS tells us what information to include, and EAD tells us how to put all of that information together so that it's readable in electronic environments. With the prevalence of electronic access to our descriptive information, the relationship between content and structure standards is increasingly important. DACS helps us to develop descriptive information that will work with a variety of structure standards while still giving us the freedom to use professional judgment when developing that description. The use of companion standards allows for interoperability. Usage of DACS promotes consistency and clarity across descriptive outputs, no matter whether you're searching for a title or creator name within the catalog or across finding aids. If they're formatted according to DACS, they will be the same. The community has developed crosswalks that allow us to take DACS formatted information and plug it into a MARC record, for example. DACS also functions as a companion standard. DACS is flexible enough that it can be used in tandem with other standards for more specialized material. For example, if you're describing audiovisual materials, it may be more appropriate to utilize standards devised specifically for these types of materials when settling on rules for things like extent. Usage of DACS promotes consistency and clarity across access points such as titles or names of creators. DACS can and should be used throughout the archival enterprise as the archivist learns more about the collection. Archival processes are fundamentally iterative, meaning that archivists accrue knowledge about the materials they accession and describe as they go about their work. DACS accommodates this characteristic of archival functions and materials and supports archivists' endeavors to develop increasingly robust archival description. DACS can and should be used in almost every part of the archival enterprise, including accessioning, arrangement, description, and reference, and it can also be used whether you're doing extremely detailed item-level description, minimal collection-level description, or anything in between. You can use DACS rules to create lots of different descriptive outputs. Archival description is a way of managing information, not a specific kind of output. DACS is not just for finding aids. It can also be used to create catalog records, digital object metadata records, and Wikipedia articles, for example. In other words, DACS was designed to be output neutral. Despite this neutrality, DACS routinely provides examples which advise you on how to express your description in EAD or MARC. Its neutrality is what makes it so easy to work with. Because it's designed to be used with other standards, DACS does not prescribe one specific kind of output, and it allows for data reuse. You create description once, and you can output in many ways. Content standards like DACS work with encoding standards like EAD to create functional archival description. Encoding standards specify the buckets, and content standards tell you what to put in those buckets. Here are some examples. The red circles are examples of elements in encoding standards, the buckets, like EAD and MARC, and the green squares are examples of pieces of description written in accordance with a content standard, what goes into the buckets. You've heard me mention EAD and MARC. These standards are closely related to DACS, but what are they? They're examples of encoding standards, which are sometimes referred to as data structure standards. Data structure standards are formal guidelines specifying the elements into which information is to be organized and structured, that is, nested, ordered, built, or even labeled. Examples of data structure standards include EAD, MARC, VRA Core, or Dublin Core. By establishing a set of elements to be included and naming those elements, data structure standards allow institutions to not only standardize output, but share information with other institutions. For example, if you have a DACS-compliant finding aid that describes your collection and you want to share it with other institutions, you can utilize an encoding standard like EAD to make it available to a site like ArchiveGrid that will in turn make the description of your collection widely available. But since it's description created from within your institution, how do they know what the title is? How do they know what the extent is? A label, an element, structured data. The encoding standard tells other systems what content goes where, and as a result, utilizing these standards allows your description to reach a much wider audience. DACS is one of a number of content standards available for description. Others include RDA and CCO. Unlike RDA and CCO, DACS was created specifically with the description of archival materials in mind. So this gives you a lot of flexibility, which is awesome, but it also gives you a lot of flexibility, which is problematic. The point of standards is consistency, so in order to ensure you're still achieving that goal, you're going to need to create local implementation guidelines. So make decisions, document those decisions, and then apply them consistently. Look to best practice guidelines like those developed by SAA. Someone else has probably encountered the same issue as you already. Local implementation decisions can easily benefit from the principles of DACS, even if they don't adhere to the rules per se. Thanks for listening, and be sure to check out the rest of the videos in the Society of American Archivists series on DACS to become an Archival Description Pro.